Hey everyone, pro photographer Ian Plant here, and today I am joined by the gear experts at Hunt's Photo and Video to talk about tripods. For many types of photography, having stable support for your camera is really important. So I'm thinking, for example, like landscape photography, which I do a lot, or if you're doing wildlife photography with really heavy super telephoto lenses, having a really good tripod is going to be critical to your success, to making sure you get tack sharp photos. So it's important to make sure that you get the right tripod for the types of photography that you like to do. And in this video, we're going to be talking about the things that you need to think about when you're buying a tripod to make sure you get the right tripod for the job and you can get the photos that you want. So if you want to learn more, stay tuned. Hey, Felix, welcome to PhotoMasters.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be on here.
Fantastic. Tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started.
My name is Felix. I currently work at Hunt's Photo and Video Melrose at our flagship store here in Melrose, Massachusetts. Been about here a year and a half now, since October 2022. I've always done photography. My background is primarily wildlife photography. Been doing that for about 7 to 8 years now. And more recently, in the past 2 to 3 years, I've picked up filmmaking. So a lot of narrative, short films, commercial work.
All right. That sounds great. So I have a question for you. Do you have a tripod?
Yes, I do.
More than one?
Yeah, I have 2 tripods. I have a smaller Benro travel one, and then a larger Benro carbon fiber tripod for when I'm walking around with big lenses like the 200 to 400 f4 or the 500 f4.
Well, my question, of course, leads us into the conversation we're having today, which is all about tripods. And I think maybe we should start off by just examining exactly why tripods are useful for photography. I think a lot of more advanced photographers probably already know the answer to this question, but there's a lot of folks out there who may be just getting into photography who don't understand why they have to carry around a heavy tripod.
Yeah, so I mean, especially with bigger lenses and especially longer focal lengths, you're hand holding sometimes, even a light lens. There's a subject quite far away. It's going to pick up every single little micro jitter and if your shutter speed's not fast enough, you're going to see that motion blur. You might not see it on the back of the camera, but then once you get home and review it on the computer, you're like, shoot, I wasn't at a high enough shutter speed. And then especially with bigger lenses, I mean, these lenses are 6, 7, 8 pounds, and it's also not really wieldy to hold around all day. And especially for me, so I do a lot of owl photography in the winter. And once it gets later, owls tend to get more active. And that's primarily when I do all my owl photography is blue hour and later. And my group of friends and I will stay till like 30 minutes past sunset, and we'll do almost 2-second exposures with the owls. And we need our tripod for that. We need a sturdy tripod, because otherwise, you're hand holding a 2-second exposure. That's not going to go too well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do a lot of wildlife photography where I use my tripods. But of course, I'm also primarily a landscape photographer. And for landscape photography, especially since landscape photographers typically are shooting during the golden hours and the magic hours, the light might be very low and we might have to use long exposures to capture sharp images. So having a tripod is absolutely critical. And also with landscape photography, we're stopping down to small apertures. That's blocking the amount of light that's coming in. And we're also trying to get everything within the scene from near to far in perfect, sharp focus. So having a sturdy tripod is absolutely essential.
I also think, now it's become like a common reoccurring conversation is, now with all these new mirrorless cameras, you have the in-body image stabilization and people don't think they need a tripod. But I think, the IBIS is great. It's fantastic. It's improved so vastly over the 2 to 3 years, more than I ever thought it would. But there's still that place for tripods. I mean, especially when you're doing landscape and long exposure wildlife and just low light photography in general. I think there's always going to be that place for tripods. It's not the IBIS, it's more us making those errors.
Yeah, I think any time that you need to work in low light, but also when you need to be very careful and critical about your composition or about your focus, your sharpness, that sort of thing. So macro photography, landscape photography, where you just have to be extra careful to make sure everything is perfect in your photo, having a tripod definitely helps out. I know that I use a tripod less and less these days. I'm doing more hand holding as high ISO photography is more of a possibility. And also, as you said, we've got that improved image stabilization. But
Yep.
I'm still using a tripod for virtually most of my photography. And so having a good tripod is critical if you want to be really good, especially if you're doing nature photography, certain types of photography, you definitely want to have a good tripod. But my biggest problem is, or I should say, the problem I see the most with people is they've got too much tripod for what they're doing. So I'm leading photo workshops. My clients show up and they've got tripods that are 2 or 3 times the size and weight compared to my tripod. I
It's
admit I
funny
have
you
a little
say
bit of
that.
tripod envy in those moments, but they're the ones who are envious when they see me, traipsing around the landscape with my ultra lightweight tripod. And they realize that their big, heavy tripod is too much for them, that they could get
Yeah.
away with something lighter. So I think it really depends on what you're shooting. So for wildlife, when you're working with big, heavy lenses, you're going to need a bigger tripod, right?
Yes. And I mean, you can get, I always tell this people when I was in internal sales here in Melrose, I always told people, buy a tripod once, dish out a bit more money. You'll never need to buy another tripod again. Because investing in a good quality, sturdy tripod is it's a long-term investment. You're never going to need to buy another one, hopefully. But having a sturdy tripod, I think, is the key. Because if you're going on an expedition somewhere, I went out to Yellowstone one year and I did not bring such a great tripod and I ended up just leaving it in the car because it could not hold the camera.
Yeah, that's another thing I see is people showing up with flimsy tripods that are inexpensive. They're not very good. They're maybe light enough, but they're just not built quite right. And as a result, they're struggling. They're fighting their tripod rather than getting the photos that they want. So I think it's important to get the right tripod, but also to get a tripod that is well built, that is sturdy. A well built, sturdy tripod can still be lightweight if it's constructed
Absolutely.
the right way. But if you've got a tripod that's just flimsy, that isn't put together the right way, then you're just going to have problems. So you've got a few tripods to show us today that you are
Yeah.
selling in the Hunt store.
So actually, one of my favorite tripods that I have used is this bigger Gitzo. I forget the model number. It is. It's one of their LS series. They did discontinue this line. They have a newer version of this one. We'll give you all the links for that later. This is a tripod that I say you buy it once and you will never buy another tripod again. It's carbon fiber. It's light. You don't think this would hold something like a 6 or even 800 millimeter lens, but you feel it and you put it on the ground. What I always do is when I'm out in the field and I'm testing a new tripod, I'll put it on the ground and I'll kind of put a bit of weight on it and see if it wiggles. With this, none of that. Because you'll notice with some tripods that are a bit flimsier, you're going to put your camera on there and it's going to go all over the place. So with this Gitzo's, one of the most notorious brands for building high quality carbon fiber tripods. And they range from everywhere. They have these bigger ones for like the bigger lenses all the way down to this tiny compact travel one, which is also carbon fiber, which you can throw in your suitcase and then take it out and then not have to worry about lugging around a huge tripod with like a gimbal or a ball head on it.
Yeah. So material is the first thing that someone needs to consider when they're buying a tripod. So carbon fiber is currently the lightest weight material for tripods, but it's also the most expensive. So a carbon fiber tripod will be sturdy, will be stable, will be relatively lightweight, but definitely is going to cost some more.
With the carbon fibers, which was something I noticed very early on, is I had an aluminum tripod before. And in the wintertime, that kind of metal gets freezing cold.
Yeah.
And that was the first thing I noticed is when I was in Yellowstone, I gripped my tripod and I was like, wow, this isn't cold at all, coming from a Manfrotto tripod, which has its purpose for video, for all my video work, and then you're like, holy cow, this doesn't get cold, which was, it's a minor thing, but like little things like that make it worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. Carbon fiber is more comfortable when it's cold out, though you have to be careful because carbon fiber can get brittle in the extreme cold. And so it's not like you're going to break your tripod if you accidentally bump it against something. But if you are trying to push it down into the snow, for example, you have to be a little extra careful because I have broken carbon fiber tripod legs doing that in the past.
There was someone in Yellowstone who was just getting out of their warm, the buggies they have going down the snowy roads there in the winter. And they took out their tripod, they put it down and they pushed down on it a bit. One leg just cracked.
Yes.
Because, like you said, it gets brittle in the cold.
Yeah. Yeah. So you just have to have a little extra care. It doesn't get so brittle that it's easy to break. But if you're not
but
careful,
it also depends on how cold it is,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so aluminum probably, it's less comfortable to carry in the cold. It handles the cold a little bit better. It doesn't get brittle. And aluminum is cheaper, and you'll find it very commonly with tripods, but aluminum is a lot heavier than carbon fiber. So I typically don't, recommend aluminum tripods to my clients. I always recommend carbon fiber. It is a little bit more money, but I think it is definitely worth it. And there
Yeah.
are also some alloys, like magnesium alloys, that go into tripods. They're not quite as lightweight as carbon fiber, but they can help keep the weight down. Absolutely, the worst material for tripods would be plastic. If you've got a plastic tripod, that probably means you haven't paid much for it, but it's also going to be one of those tripods you're fighting when you're in the field.
Yeah. And even, I've had customers come in here and they pick out like $30 tripod for their trip to Iceland. And they have something like a 5D Mark IV with a 635. I'm like, you might not want to put that on there because also if there's a gust of wind with a cheaper tripod, it's just
Hmm.
going to blow over. And that's another point I make is with investing in a good tripod, you're also buying for the security of your camera. If there's a gust of wind and you're a bit far back, it's going to blow over in a few seconds. With one of these Gitsos or a Benro, you have that security and that comfort knowing that your camera is steady on sticks.
Yeah, I have noticed that there are some tripod models. Once again, they tend to be less expensive, where the legs just don't come out enough. So it's not a
Yeah.
stable base. They're much more likely to tip over. So you want to avoid that. Um, and, a lot of times to make the tripod more compact, the manufacturer will add more leg sections. And if they do it right, you can have multiple leg sections and still have a lot of stability. But that can be another point of weakness, especially for inexpensive
The
tripods,
bottom
where
rail.
they might have 4 or 5 leg sections that you can extend out and they don't do it right. And that makes the tripod flimsy.
Yep. Yep. Especially, yeah, no, that's a big thing. The plastic tripods I always try to avoid. It's just, it
Mm.
might as well even just go up to the smaller metal tripod. I'd pick aluminum over that all day.
And so, I guess the question I get a lot from clients is, well, how big of a tripod do you really need? I mean, they see me out there. I've got my lightest tripod that I use for travel and for a lot of my landscape photography is a 2-pound tripod, and that includes the ball head on it. So it's actually very lightweight. It doesn't come up very tall, but it's perfect for a lot of landscape photography because you don't typically need a lot of height. With landscape photography, more often than not, you're shooting at waist, knee, or ground level. So being able to get down low is critical. And you also don't want a lot of weight because you're hiking in the landscape and a heavy tripod gets exhausting to carry. And so
Yeah.
the only times when I'm doing landscape where I might want a beefier tripod, something that's heavier and taller, is if I'm photographing along the coast or streams and waterfall. If I'm actually putting my tripod in the water, with rushing water, you do need that extra heft to cut down on the vibrations and to minimize the risk of the water tipping over the tripod. But for a
Yeah.
lot of landscape and a lot of travel photography, a smaller, more compact, lightweight tripod will work great. But with wildlife photography, if you're using super telephoto lenses, you definitely need that support and you need that height. You need that eye level height because a lot of times you'll be shooting most comfortably with your camera at eye level.
And that was the thing for me. I'm a pretty big guy. I'm 6'5", so I could never find a tripod that was my height. And so I finally decided to invest in a higher end tripod just so I could get it up to my eye level because you don't want to be hunching over when you're tall and it just hurts your back. But that was always the issue for me. The tripods were too short.
Yeah, I guess that's another consideration when you're buying a tripod is
Yeah.
how tall you are. I've definitely worked with clients who are very short and they could get away with smaller tripods.
Well, that's again where it all plays in together is if you have a higher end tripod, a higher tripod, there's more leg sections, and that's where build quality plays into. So it all kind of plays together in the choice you make for your tripod.
Well, so what are some of the tripod brands at Hunts that you carry that you recommend the most to clients?
So the one I recommend most for travel is some of the smaller Manfrottos and the Benros. Manfrotto, Benro, and Gitzo are our most popular brands. They Benro probably has the best, I'd say, bang for buck all around. They have the smaller carbon fiber travel tripods all the way up to the huge ones like the Gitzo. So they have the most variety, I'd say. I usually tend to lean towards Benro, especially if they're just looking for a first time sturdy tripod where they don't need to invest too much money. they have the option to, but just a good all-around tripod.
And so, what's the price point for a lot of these tripods? I mean, when someone's investing, obviously the smaller the tripod is, the less price it's going to have. Some of the really big, heavier, sturdier tripods are going to be much more expensive. But when
Yeah.
we're looking at, let's say, a Gitzo versus a Manfrotto versus a Benro, what type of price points are we looking at for carbon fiber tripods?
So for carbon fiber, Manfrotto doesn't have too many carbon fiber tripods compared to the other brands right now. So let's put it this way. This Gitzo is, for the legs alone, $1,200. So you're paying a hefty penny for that. But they can range anywhere from $200-$300 all the way up to, $1,200-$1,300. So you have a big area to work with whatever your budget is.
And there's a few other considerations that I think people need to think about when they're buying a tripod. So one is whether you can easily get to ground level. And so this is going to be most important for landscape or macro photographers, though sometimes when you're photographing wildlife, you want to get that low perspective. And some tripods make it difficult to get to ground levels because they have a center column that you can't take out. So I always look for a tripod that has a removable center column or a reversible center column, so you can easily get down to ground level.
And that's what I think is so great about like the Benros and the Gitzos is they have that removable center column right here on the bottom, and you can add things like a ball joint where you can level in the field no matter what terrain you're on. They have the long center column. But like also with these, when you're down on the ground, you can lift this little latch right here and you can bring it all the way like this so you can get to eye level quite easily. So you don't always need to try to figure out how to get a lower perspective. You can just put all the legs up and you're at eye level right away. So that's a convenient thing that a lot more tripods are getting now. It's convenient if you're doing landscape or macro and that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of accessories. These tripods are so modular. You can add like you can have the gimbal head, the ball head. There's several attachments that you can extend even further off of the ball head. There's endless amounts of options.
Yeah, and the final consideration is whether the feet are removable. So you could put spikes on or claws that will help you grip in slippery terrain or on ice. And so that's something I look for as well. The better tripods, you can just unscrew the feet and it'll reveal a spike or a claw, or you can just rotate the feet and the spike will come out. And those are really useful when you're dealing with that slippery terrain.
Yeah. So like the Gitzo primarily come with the rubber feet already attached, but we also sell for all the different brands of spikes on the bottom replacement feet for it. So, people, come in freaking out like I lost the bottom piece. No, those you can buy those separately as well.
All right. Well, Felix, thank you so much for joining us today. Definitely a lot to think about when buying a tripod. And the folks at Hunt's Photo and Video can help you out. They excel at customer service and they're well known for it. So if you have any questions, the experts, the gear experts at Hunt's Photo can get you where you need to be, whether it's tripods or any other photo gear. And as always, they've got some specials for you that will appear in the description that goes with this video. Felix, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for having me.